Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's public meeting. My name is John Urino, and I'm the zoning examiner for the city of Tucson. We have three cases on the docket for this evening. The first two are special exception cases for Tucson Water, and the third is a continuation of the hearing that we began on March 11 in the C9-20126 at Campbell PAD matter. So I'm going to start with the Tucson Water Special Exception cases. I'll call the first case, case SE 2101, Tucson Water, Nancy Rose Boulevard. Mr. Beal, would you like to present the case?
Actually, Mr. Zone Examiner Maria Gallosos will be giving that case.
Thank you. Ms. Gaeso, will you please present the case?
Sure, Mr. Urino. Yeah, this is another request by Tucson Water to make improvements in another Tucson Water's well. This specific well, it's at 1937 North Nancy Rose Boulevard. In the middle of a neighborhood, the applicant is proposing to make a lot of improvements on the site for the well, including a new control building to house a new monitoring system and communication equipment and a pump. They're also proposing a new 20-foot high communication antenna, a new 5,000-gallon hydro tank. Also, they're proposing a chain link fence with slabs along the north and the south property lines, and a chain link fence slatted too along the east property line, a masonry wall along the west property line, and landscape border along Nancy Rose Boulevard. They're proposing the installation of 2 screened access gates in addition to the existing vehicular access gate, and an on-site parking for the maintenance vehicles, and a variety of other equipment installations. So this site is on R1, and per the Unified Development Code, requires approval through the zoning examiner special exception procedure, and as well as review by the design review board, and that already took place. It's in our staff report, and they recommended approval. And that's all I have. I believe the applicant is present and will be available for a presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Gaeso. Ms. Willett, would you like to be heard?
Sure, Mr. Urino, I'd like to say a few words. Good evening. Just for the record, my name is Lexi Willett, and I'm a project manager at the Planning Center when we're located in downtown Tucson at 2 East Congress, Suite 600. I'm also joined this evening by representatives of Tucson Water, Fernando Molina and Dorothy Dolan, and so they, if any questions arise, are available to answer from Tucson Water. But as Ms. Gayoso mentioned, this request is for a special exception to equip a well that was drilled on the property in 2019. There's been a well active on this site since about the 60s, maybe a little bit earlier. So this use has been there. In this process, the folks at Tucson Water have worked very closely with the adjacent property owners, hence why there's a different screening type for each property boundary. So on the north and south side, we worked with those neighbors to achieve the desirable screening, and then on the west side, that neighbor requested that we install a wall. So Tucson Water is doing that, and then in addition, they're installing landscaping it's about a 10 by 11 or 12 by 11 area along Nancy Rose Boulevard, again, working with the neighbors to determine what type of plants would be appropriate. So as you may have seen in the approvals and protests that have come through, there is some support for this from those neighbors. And so we're thankful for that, and respectfully request a positive recommendation from you.
Thank you, Ms. Willett. I did note in the one protest for this case that The McCarthys, I believe it was, had an issue with some, they feel, with some damage from when the well was drilled a few years ago. And I would ask that you have someone from Tucson Water reach out to them and see if there are any concerns that they have that can be addressed. But I don't have any questions on the special exception case, and thank you very much.
Yeah, Mr. Reno, absolutely. We'll definitely have Tucson Water reach out to the McCarthys to address that concern.
Thank you. Would anyone else in the audience like to be heard on this special exception case? Someone has their microphone on as if they want to speak. Does someone want to be heard on this case, SE 2101 Tucson Water, Nancy Rose Boulevard? Hearing no one, I'm closing the hearing on this case, and I would ask the audience to, we welcome your participation, but I would ask you to mute your devices and telephones until you're called on. It just helps other folks who are speaking to be able to be heard effectively. The second case this evening is case SE 2103 Tucson Water, Cherry Avenue. Ms. Gayoso, would you like to present the case?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ureno. Yeah, this specific Tucson Water site is located right next to the east of the Salt Point Catholic High School. They're proposing some minor modifications on the site for improvements, including the replacement of an existing communications antenna with a new 20-foot high antenna, the modification of the existing control structure to house an upgraded supervisory control and data acquisition computer system. Also, just several various equipment upgrades. The applicant is proposing to maintain the existing 6-foot high chain link fence that is topped with barbed wire, and is also proposing to maintain the existing vegetation on site and the access points. Again, this site is also zone residential R2 and is requires approval through the zoning examiner's special exception procedure, as well as the review by the design review board, which also took place already as part of the staff report.
Thank you, Ms. Gayoso. Ms. Willett, would you like to be heard on this case?
Just very briefly, if I may, Mr. Ureno. Again, for the record, my name is Lexi Wella, and I'm a project manager at Tucson Water, oh my goodness, at the Planning Center, which is located at 2 East Congress, Suite 600 in downtown Tucson. I'm also joined this evening by Fernando Molina and Charlie Sulik with Tucson Water. So if questions arise, they're available. Again, this request is for minor technology upgrades to improve the monitoring system at at an existing well site. And the improvements largely entail enclosing a structure that's partially closed right now. So basically, the improvements are just installing a shade structure over the existing building that has walls and 3/4 of a roof. So they're just enclosing that. As part of this process, we held a neighborhood meeting, and nobody attended that, but have had communication with the folks across the street, and they are pleased with our improvements. And then as part of this, we received information from Sal Point regarding a request to maintain the landscaping and establish a maintenance program for that. And Tucson Water is currently already in the works figuring out a maintenance program and irrigation to ensure that the oleanders adjacent to Sal Point are maintained as we move into the future operation of the site. So with that, I will open it over to you, Mr. Zoning Examiner, if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Willett. I do not. Would anyone in the audience like to be heard on this case? Hearing no one, I'm closing the hearing on case SE 2103. Thank you very much, Ms. Willett, for coming.
Thank you.
The third case is a continuation of the hearing that we held on March 11. It's case C92012, 6th at Campbell Pad. Mr. Beal, would you like to update us on anything, but specifically on protests and approvals to date?
Yes, Mr. Reno. As of to date, we have a total of 24 approvals, 81 protests, 3 are outside the 150 feet, and 2 are within the 150 feet. And then we have comments or letters from the Feldman Neighborhood Association, which was a protest, letters or joint letter from Rincon Heights Neighborhood Association, Sam Hughes, which was protest, letters of support from the University of Arizona, letters from Palo Verde Neighborhood Association, which is a protest, letter from West University Neighborhood Association, which is a protest, letter from Jefferson Park, which was a protest, and a letter from North Dodge board member Neighborhood Association, which is a protest. We have unsigned letters and emails received by Planning and Development Services are represented in the total. And there is one email or letter which was submitted as an approval, and there were 76 emails or letters of protest that were submitted to PDSD as a protest. And then since the approval protests were put together, we have roughly about 8 or so other protest letters that we have forwarded over to you with some of the letters. So that's what we have so far.
Thank you, Mr. Beal. Anything else from you right now?
No, there's nothing else for me right now.
Thank you very much. So I note some new faces and new names in the audience, so I'm just going to go ahead and explain a little bit about what we're doing tonight. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is a continuation of the public hearing that began on March 11. And I'm the zoning examiner for the city of Tucson. I conduct rezoning hearings on behalf of the mayor and council and make findings of fact, which I put into a written report along with my recommendation, which I then send along to mayor and council for their consideration and for their final decision. My report will be based on the information submitted to me, which includes the rezoning application, the staff report, all written approvals and protests, all correspondence, and the testimony given at tonight's public hearing. I will also include in the record all documents submitted to me up to the close of the public hearing. A recording of tonight's testimony is being made. If requested, a transcript will be prepared. With that in mind, if you choose to testify tonight, and I invite you to do so, I would ask you please begin by stating your name and spelling the last name for the transcriptionist, and to speak clearly, which I don't always do, but I'll try to do better, and also state your address. So what happens after the close of the hearing kind of goes like this. First, I complete a preliminary report within 5 working days after the close of the public hearing. The final report will be issued 2 weeks after the close of the public hearing. For those of you who wish to receive a copy of my preliminary report and are not a listed party on the case, that basically means anyone who is not the applicant, please send an email to tucsonzoning@tucsonaz.gov. Again, it's tucsonrezoning@tucsonaz.gov, or you can call the Planning and Development Services Department. Going back to my final report, which I do 2 weeks from the close of the public hearing, that will be available from the Planning and Development Services Department, and I send the final report along to the mayor and council. At the scheduled public hearing on the case, the mayor and council will then vote on the matter based on my recommendation along with other factors. Here's how we'll go in the hearing tonight. I'm going to open the hearing and ask to hear from the applicant or the applicant's representative first. I will then ask to hear from folks who've emailed in or phoned in to Planning and Development Services and asked for the opportunity to speak tonight. And then I will open it up to anyone else who's present who wishes to be heard. It is important that if you have something you want me to know about in connection with this case, you tell me tonight. I cannot have any contact with anybody involved in the case outside of this public hearing, so I invite you to participate by testifying tonight if you would like to do so. So, with those introductory remarks finished, I would call on the applicant or the applicant's representative, Mr. Cummings or Ms. Hogan, or anyone else on behalf of the applicant to go ahead and give any remarks that they would like to give.
Yeah, it's on mute. Good evening. My name is Scott Cummings. I am the property owner and the applicant. I am joined in this room by Miguel, Richard, and John from Fords Architecture, and then also Frank Messia and Cindy Hogan from CDG Architects. They are both firms that are working with me on this project. Miguel and his crew did not partake in the original meeting back 3-4 weeks ago. Subsequently, have come to join in and give me some more of their guidance and expertise. I don't know if we want to rehash the whole presentation about the site. I mean, my understanding is we do a continuation on where we're at between the issues between the Rincon Heights neighborhood and myself. Is that what you would like, John, or do you want me to go through the whole spiel?
Mr. Cummings, I'll tell you that I've reviewed my notes from the prior hearing. I've reviewed the application, the rezoning application again, the traffic impact analysis, all of the materials that have been submitted by Ms. Hogan on behalf of the applicant. I've reviewed each and every one of the letters received by Planning and Development Services, reviewed all of the approvals and protests. I have noted that there were 2 meetings that you participated in over Zoom, I believe, with some interested parties. I have not played the video of those meetings. So this is your time to be heard, Mr. Cummings. So whatever you want to tell me, but you don't need, in my view, to revisit the matters you touched upon in the first hearing. But you're welcome to do so if you feel it'd be important.
Okay. I would like to not correct, but expand on that. We did have 2 Zoom meetings, which were open to everyone in the neighborhood and to also my staff. And then also I had a face-to-face meeting with Lee Marsh, who's the president of the neighborhood association, privately. I thought all 3 meetings were beneficial. I was hoping that everyone was negotiating or trying to negotiate in good faith. We came, out of I think there's 20 some issues or points that they brought up in their neighborhood letter. And we agreed on some, we didn't agree on a lot of them. As you had asked us from subsequently from the last meeting, was that even if we didn't see eye to eye, that we at least took the time to discuss the issues so we understood each other's position. So I think that, that took place, and I respect that. And, as I just said, there's some things we did agree to, and there's quite a few things we haven't. One of the things that it would be remiss to give a little bit of history about the properties and the fact that it had been removed from the neighborhoods, from the boundaries of the neighborhood. And I think, John, you're probably pretty well aware of the memorandum of understanding from 1996. I don't need to go into that.
That's right. That's
okay.
Correct.
So I would just like to point out at that time, that was a unilateral decision by the neighborhood between the property owner and the neighborhood. I mean, they did have agreements with the university and the city, but this isn't something I asked for to be removed from the neighborhood, but it is what it is. And it was a deal point that was made so that hopefully the university would at least slow down their encroachment into the neighborhood. So it may seem like a moot point, but I think it's very important in this situation. The fact that the neighborhood was given the right, or the university was basically given the rights to these properties, so to speak, to use them for what they wanted or needed. And over the years, as I stated from the very beginning, this was a 38-year process of buying these properties. and they were bought with the intent that I would be a user or develop the pieces in the future. And, you know, it was discerning if back in 1996, because basically there was comments that I was being thrown to the wolves and that eminent domain would come through and I would never have a opportunity to have the benefit of these properties that would be taken by the university. So it wasn't until recently, well, maybe about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, that a dialogue started with the university and myself. And I had several meetings with different people at the university and their planning department and got a better understanding of what they wanted to do with these properties. And part of it was a study that was done, I think it was 2009, by Air St. Rose out of Baltimore, that came in and really looked at what should happen to different parts of the university in their future planning. And at that point, it was agreed upon, or it was put forth in their documentation that there needed to be an activity node at that corner or at that part of the university at Campbell and 6. And so when I started meeting with the university, they were encouraging and they wanted private development to do the things or to provide the services, the activities that I could provide or any other developer. And that's how it began. I mean, I didn't think 20 years ago this conversation would ever be going. And so after I filed, we began working with Frank and Cindy at CDG, and we started to do some planning. And subsequent to that, we filed our PAD. And I just think it's important that we're trying to do something here that is beneficial to the whole community. With trying to meet the needs of what the university wants on that corner, what would be beneficial to the neighborhood, whatever we build there that wouldn't be so obtrusive or something that would diminish their quality of life or diminish their land values. And I think we've come up with a great plan for that. And one of the things that we have come up with is a diagram that I think is imperative that we look at, because there's been we put the majority of our mass in front of the parking garage, which has been discussed before, goes upwards to 85 feet. And it's well over, I think it's 200 feet wide. And I think it's almost 300 feet by the time it gets to the neighbor to the south. And is this something we can, I mean, we've sent it to John, I don't know.
Yeah.
Can everyone see it?
No, we can share it.
Go ahead. If you want to share the screen, go right ahead, please. We're getting feedback. Excuse me, Scott and crew. We're getting some feedback. Would everyone else please mute their phones? You'll have a chance to testify when you're called on, but if you can mute your phones now, it'll help with the feedback issue. Please go ahead, Scott.
Can everyone see the diagram?
It's there. I see it. Yes.
Okay. John, are you gonna?
Sure. Well, this is a section diagram taken from south to north across 6th. So the large volume in the middle of the diagram is the existing parking garage. And when we see the color diagram, that's the proposed building. So as you can see from the neighborhood to the south, it is difficult to see this building from that vantage point. That's what those dashed lines represent. The color diagram shows the proposed height of the structure, and then to the right-hand side of the colorful diagram, 6th Street, and then the training facility for the university beyond it. So what we're seeing is at the bottom is the mixed-use retail, and then we have levels of parking above that, and then we have a transitional floor because the structural grid just doesn't align, and then we have hotel uses, and then the top floor could be some sort of a purchased suites or condominiums. We're still working out the program for that, and then rooftop mechanical units.
One thing I'd just like to clarify, originally John said looking across 6th Street, it's actually looking across 7th, the residential to the south. And I think it's important to clarify here because I think there's a lot of misinformation going out that, you know, the common, I guess, one of the newscasters is saying there's 14 stories of student housing coming. Well, this clearly, I think it's important to look at this cross section because it really denotes that the ground floor itself is close to 20 feet, correct?
Yes, right.
And then parking, on this one we show approximately 4 floors of parking. So basically you're up above the parking garage, the U of A parking garage before any residential. And let me clarify that too, because John said hotel. I mean, it's not specifically denoted just as a hotel use. It would be some type of residential use. It could be, you know, market rate apartments or a hotel.
And this is also to note, this is based on CDG's pad, that this is the high. We're showing this one because this is the highest one. The other two step down. Let's remember that. We can pull up the CDG pad if needed.
Thank you for that. Scott, could you please ask John in your room just to state his name so that the transcriptionist knows who else was speaking besides you?
John McColgan, McColgin.
Thank you very much, Mr. McColgan. All right, if you're done with this graphic, and I had seen this before in your submittal and understand it, but thank you for sharing it for the benefit of the others in the audience. You can stop sharing now if you'd like to. And if there's anything else Mr. Cummings or anyone from your team would like to say now, please go ahead. I have a couple of questions, but I'll reserve those until you're done.
Okay.
This is Miguel Portavilla from For's Architecture and Interiors. And I had put together about 16 or 17 points that I wrote them down so I wouldn't be too many words, would be kind of just sprawled out. So I'd like to go over those points.
If you could start, I'm sorry, if you could start by spelling your last name, it just helps the person who types up from the recording. Please go ahead.
My first name is Miguel, last name is Fuentevilla, Fuentevilla.
Thank you. Please go ahead.
So these have to do with what are the good things about what, you know, increased density at the corner of Campbell and 6th would do, and I'll read them off. And these again are facts and statistics that we've drawn from many studies. And number one, more density and less sprawl is engaging more housing into sustainable growth. There are social, convenience, economic, environmental benefits of living in places of higher density if they are designed to be mixed use, walkable, and pedestrian scale. Higher density is essentially for creating lively places with a lot of amenities, and it allows for beautiful, you know, beautiful walking areas, low car use, and makes life convenient and enjoyable when there are close amenities. It gives more access, contrary to what some people think, to families and individuals in urban neighborhoods. It creates walkable environments with amenities at the first floor for all adjacent neighborhoods like restaurants and personal services, as in barbers and salons, because as we know in today's day and age, retail is being completely rethought, and those kind of personal services and food restaurants are really where it's going. On the next count, creating concealed parking areas that don't allow parking in the neighborhoods, which we think is actually really important. Creating new upgraded landscape borders at the neighborhoods to the properties. Includes adding new sidewalks, new trees, new landscaping, and urban walking amenities. As you can see in the pad set up by CDG. This also creates a buffer to 6th Avenue and Campbell, which are central commuting and arterial streets in Tucson. A growing body of health and policy research suggests residential neighborhoods, density, and street connectivity affect walking and total physical activity, both which are important risk factors for obesity and related chronic diseases. Obviously, it helps in the sprawl with school districts for managing transportation and infrastructure. A big study is that sprawl does not pay the bills. Low density developments often do not provide a large enough tax base to cover the cost of public services, and mixed use developments with retail and apartments tend to pay a higher commercial tax rate and provide more services privately than communities. And as we know, low density is much more expensive to build. So the more spread out things are, the more costly it is to provide municipal services. For the university and the neighborhood sustainability, higher density development helps attract new employers, attracts employers want to be there where their workforce is rather than try to attract workers to come to them. So communities that are convenient to work and lifestyles are thus more attractive for both the workforce and employers. Higher density development can increase property values. I do realize that. When there's a strong sense of community, lots of amenities within a neighborhood, density and diversity can add a value of their own. Higher density developments generate less traffic than low density developments. While residents of low density single family communities often have 2 or more cars per household, residents of high density apartments and condominiums tend to have only 1 per household. Infill developments repurposes unused land, and of course we have many abandoned properties that are not being used right now into tax paying and revenue generating. And finally, to end, walkable communities, 3 really important points is affordable lifestyles near urban amenities, reduces sprawl, conserves lands and environmental resources, and promotes social interaction. So those are just a lot of studies that we've looked up that we think enhance the reason this project would work really well at this corner.
Thank you. Mr. Cummings, anything else, sir?
No, I'm ready for your questions, John.
Okay. I may have some later, but before we ask for others to testify, I would be interested to know, you said at the beginning of your remarks that you had agreed on some issues with other folks and had not agreed on some issues. And I have my list still of issues that I've gleaned both from the letter from December, but then also from the protests and emails and letters that have been sent in since then. If you could share with me what issues you believe you've agreed on, that would help me right now.
Sure. There's a little nebulous about the dry cleaning personal service on any parcel. From what I remember, is that what is meant is that they don't want to have a dry cleaning facility correctly, or so I think a dry cleaning service, meaning you can pick up suits or whatever, is allowed, I believe. We had agreed with to provide the installation of the bike station. We've discussed the sidewalk along 6th. We had talked about 12 feet. We proposed 10. 10 seemed to be agreeable after we went through and discussed it. The big thing, the last meeting, and we were working in good faith. I mean, I went through this, I think there's 20 some, and they were all subject to getting approval by the neighborhood. But it still came down to the big 3, which is the heights, the not wanting any portion of it to be used for group dwelling, and then the third issue, which I think you hit on pretty well in the last presentation, was about affordable housing, and that is taken out of the equation, that it's not going to be subject to any of that.
Okay.
I would also add, Scott, if I may, we did reach some amount of agreement about the ingress point on Campbell.
Oh yeah. I'm sorry. Thank you, Lee. Yeah, we are adding a ingress egress between the shop space that will be at the corner and the alley that is directly to the south. So there, on this diagram, it just shows ingress and egress off that alley. We're actually going to include another ingress and egress point somewhere between 6th Street and that alley. That's correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. Anything else, Mr. Cummings, right now?
That's it at this time.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to now call, and just for the record, that was Mr. Lee Marsh, M-A-R-S-H, who supplemented what Mr. Cummings just had to say a minute ago. So now I'm going to open it up to folks who emailed in or phoned in and said they'd like to be heard. And then after that, I'll open it up to others who are present who wish to testify. The first name on my list is Stacia Reeves. Did I pronounce that badly?
No, you did it perfectly. My name is Stacia Reeves, and I don't know how to put my name up there, but it's
You don't need to put it up. You don't need to put up. Just spell your last name.
Gotcha. R-E-E-V as in Valentine, E-S. Stacia Reeves. Thank you.
Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Urine.
Close enough.
Mr. John. My name is Stacia Reeves, and I live at 224 North Highland. And I'm opposed to this rezoning project at 6th Street and Campbell for 3 reasons. Currently, there are unsafe routes for foot, bike, scooter, traffic all along 6th Street. Secondly, the vehicle congestion on 6th Street, gridlock, is excessive, causing excessive cut-throughs through the Rincon Heights neighborhood as a result of this gridlock. As you know, 6th Street is the most narrow streets of all the streets bordering the U of A, and it's currently beyond its carrying capacity. There's not a dispute with that. So if we rezone, that's only going to be even more density with the current infrastructure, which is going to completely create unintended consequences. One problem with the infrastructure today is that 6th Street does not have bike lanes. This means bicyclists, scooter users or riders, skateboarders, they're all competing with pedestrians on the sidewalks. I see it all the time. Sometimes safely, sometimes not safely. This is not the intention of the city, nor is it the proposal. None of us want this, but it's what's happening. 6th Street is not safe. And what's happening is that we have these routes to go along the neighborhood, we have these routes to go elsewhere, and it's getting even more congested with the cut-throughs. The proposal of rezoning emphasizes bicycle foot traffic, which is great. But as we add more and more users, this is dangerous. There needs to be a designated multi-use pathway adjacent to the sidewalk along 6th Street from Euclid to Campbell to ensure safe routes for pedestrians, bicyclists, scooters, has been approved by the City Council. Secondly, pedestrians are going to cross north and south across 6th Street, both at Campbell Avenue and at National Championship Drive with this development. That's exponentially going to increase the pedestrian traffic that will add to the gridlock of vehicle traffic that already exists on 6th Street. And we can't use the pandemic data and survey. We need to use the pre-pandemic data of the users from the 3 existing parking garages, including the one by the library in McHale, the surface lots, the parents and the TUSD buses who are dropping off the students and picking them up from Mansfield Middle School, the U of A rec users, the residents, the daily traffic. This road is overused and the delays will be that much more, especially with increased pedestrian crossings north and south. The walkways under the road, like Speedway, need to be part of this development plan. There has to be underground walkways to make it safe, as they did on Speedway, with that increased development north of the U of A. Another negative consequence of the vehicle gridlock along 6th Street is people want to get away from that. This is Tucson. People know how to cut through neighborhoods, and they do. And it's going to increase the accidents and the congestion. When I hear accidents, which is frequent, people typically say, I didn't see them. Yeah, we have a lot of street parking. We have a lot of visual barriers. And with that increased intensity, that doesn't create a positive community development. Right now, there are many of our narrow streets where we have street parking and a moving vehicle, only one can get through. So therefore, vehicles have to stop, wait for that, which causes more congestion, more frustration, and unacceptable community conditions. The other thing is there's a lot of commercial space that's been vacant for years at this intersection and location. Largely, there's insufficient parking and it's inconvenient. And the proposal that I see does not address the problem when it's at its capacity. That is a concern. Why? Because then there will be street parking and there will be more vacancy of commercial use because as it is now, it's not being occupied and hasn't been for years. I'm specifically talking about the one that is directly due east of that restaurant location, as well as the other ones on 6th Street. What I'd like to share with you is that this isn't not the right location. Good idea, wrong location. We have an expansion of Broadway right now that is going on right now. So how about Broadway and Campbell on the northwest corner that could sustain that type of movement, safe routes, and development? I know this would not be beneficial for Mr. Cummings as he's not the owner. However, it would be irresponsible for us not to increase the infrastructure of this existing pathway for safe routes and allow this rezoning to happen.
Thank you, Ms. Reeves. The next person I'd like to call on is Thea Erickson. I hope I said that correctly.
Hello. Can you hear me all right?
I can. Just start with your name, even though I
Would help
just said
if my
and spell your last name. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name is Thea Erickson, Erickson.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Examiner Lorino, for this opportunity to speak on behalf of the Rincon Heights neighborhood. I am a homeowner at 1127 East 8th Street, and I first moved to this neighborhood over 33 years ago when I was 4 years old. There are many reasons for which I'm adamantly opposed to the requested PAD, and I will focus on the most important two here. Number one, the project's proposed height and possible uses. 14 stories and an 18,000 square foot bar are simply incompatible with our residential neighborhood. I don't want to see the day-to-day lives of residents here negatively impacted in a way that the applicant will never have to experience himself. The zoning should be instead in scale with the neighborhood, not over 5 times what's currently allowed. Number two, inadequate community engagement process. Rincon Heights has been incredibly reasonable in our attempts to work out a proposal that we can support. We are supporting a good development of that corner. The applicant has seemed largely disinterested in finding common ground with us, such as compromises we tried to propose. And I'm reminded in all this that he is the one asking for something, not us. Also, I'd like to point out something that earlier it was said that the university had written a letter of support. I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that the Arizona Board of Regents owns a parcel in the proposed PAD. Vice President for University Planning, Design, and Operations, Robert Smith, wrote a letter to the City Council on March 8th of this year regarding this topic. He wrote that the university's general support for the proposed PAD is conditional. It is conditional on, and I quote, the developer working closely with the university and the neighborhoods through the project planning process and to respond appropriately to their needs and concerns. To me, I'm here to testify that this applicant has failed to meet those conditions as spelled out by the university, which is a landowner, because we don't feel that our concerns have been appropriately considered yet. Examiner Lorino, I ask you to please listen to the University of Arizona and the people of this area and deny this PAD application as it currently stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Erickson. Next, I would like to hear from Mr. Marsh, Lee Marsh.
Sure. Hi, my name is Lee Marsh. That's M-A-R-S-H. I'm the current president of the Rincon Heights Neighborhood Association. Mr. Reno, just thank you so much for giving me the time to speak and hearing us out. And I also just want to add, I hope you and your family are well. Now, I did have a prepared statement, but I did want to respond to a few things that the applicant brought up during his time to speak. The first was the removal of the properties from the neighborhood. I'm not quite sure how that's germane to this conversation because a lot of houses, residential and commercial properties were removed from the neighborhood at that time. It's also my understanding that part of the MOU was setting sort of standards and boundaries about what the university would build if they were to build it themselves. And that's not really what is happening in this case. I'd also like to add that, just to be clear, affordable housing, we didn't take that off the table. That's something that's still very important to the neighborhood. It's just that I understand, Mr. Urino, that's not something that you have direct authority over. So with that said, as you know, over the last few weeks, we had the opportunity to meet with the applicant and his team on several occasions to try and reach some agreement on this project. During this time, it became clear that Mr. Cummings has a vision for this project. Mixed use, urban infill, using modern materials with amenities for the neighborhood, all with a touch of local Tucson flavor. And when put that way, it sounds pretty good, but in all our meetings, we've never once seen concept sketches or a rendering that communicated more than the scale of the building. That cross diagram that we saw tonight was never presented to us before this evening. We've not seen floor plans or anything resembling a site plan. There's no indication of what the actual uses would be, where they would be located within the structure, how much parking would be required. You know, the ingress points, you brought up the ingress points on Campbell, but we never actually agreed to or found out how many ingress points would be necessary on 6th Street or where they would be located. We don't know what tenants, if any, are interested in the retail and service spaces. There doesn't really seem to be a specific plan at all, and whatever was supposed to be the vision for this project, it has not been articulated. And so as the neighborhood, we're sort of left to imagine the worst. For instance, an 18,000 square foot bar or nuisance rooftop amenities. You know, Mr. Cummings has said on a number of occasions, it's not his intention to do one thing or another, but we all know about the road to hell and what it's made from. So the neighborhood's trepidation has been exacerbated by the lack of public engagement and communication on the part of the applicant. Most proposals of this scale, such as the old Volvo site or the monastery, include a robust public engagement process where neighborhood input is considered an important factor and helps lead the overall direction. So we, the neighborhood, have tried to offer one idea after another, which we've already enumerated in the letters we sent earlier in this process. I just want to reiterate, too, we were willing to negotiate on some of the really key points, like the height. Originally, I think we'd suggested 50 or 60 feet or something, and we were willing to go up to 70, and then in the process of negotiating against ourselves to 90 feet. But suffice to say, we've shown up to these meetings with solution-minded thinking. We were told time and again that the things we were asking for would make the project financially inviable, but provided no justification why or how. And to the applicant's credit, dropping group dwelling as an allowed use was put on the table, but only in the absence of all of our other concerns being part of that conversation, which is really a far cry from any sort of mutually agreed solution or negotiation. And it seems like the unyielding attitude from the other side of the table has largely been driven by this vague and undefined nature of this proposal. I mean, how can the developer really accept any concessions if it's unknown what's needed to carry out the project? And how can the neighborhood be asked to approve this project when we don't really know what's going to be built? So the neighborhood is able to continue talking with the applicant, but it seems kind of a futile exercise until we know what it is we're talking about. I therefore am asking that this proposal be denied until the applicant provides a plan for this planned area development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh. Colby Henley, please. Mr. Henley.
Hi, my name is Colby Henley. Last name is Henley. I live at 1140 East 10th Street in Rincon Heights. So yeah, as Mr. Marsh said, I agree with a lot of what he said. So I think part of the challenge for us is negotiating. It's felt like kind of throwing darts at a rubber ducky bobbing out in the ocean. It's kind of all over the place. And I understand that Mr. Cummings is trying to keep, it's kind of has the kitchen sink of pads where he's trying to keep all the options. This could be a hotel or apartments or student housing, could be an 18,000 foot bar, it could be restaurants. He's trying to keep everything a possibility. And so every time we want to kind of restrain and confine and define the project, there's pushback because that limits what he's able to do. I will say that, you know, it sounds a little bit from their presentation that we are against density, when in fact we are agreeable, as we've always stated. We are agreeable to multi-story apartments, retail there, even a hotel, a small bar. We're open and agree that that's an appropriate location for all that. So the lesson on density isn't news to us. We're the one advocating for less parking, more walkable, affordable housing. All of those things are part and parcel to what the neighborhood pushes for on a regular basis. So, you know, it's interesting that that the applicant insists that the only way he can make money on a residential lot that he purchased 30 years ago is to build a 140-foot tall building. You know, to me, that either sounds like a really bad real estate investment or it's disingenuous. As Mr. Marsh stated, we've negotiated with ourselves. We've gone with higher heights and said, you know, what can we offer? We've offered creative solutions for affordable housing. We are agreeable to some group dwelling if it's an appropriate location and limited to a certain amount. We agreed to a Class 6 liquor license if it's limited in scale. All of those things were rejected out of hand. And so I agree with Mr. Marsh that I feel like Mr. Cummings needs to go define his project, find his funders, and then come back and negotiate with the neighborhood when he knows exactly what it is that the project is that we're negotiating. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Henley. Diana Lett, Ms. Lett. Is Diana Lett?
Hi, my name is Diana Lett. I'm trying to speak. I think I'm unmuted. My name is Diana Lett. My last name is spelled L-E-T-T. I am the vice president of Feldman's Neighborhood Association. I live at 1309 North First Avenue in Tucson. I am first going to just reference the letter that I wrote on behalf of my neighborhood association board, which objects to the height and more in detail objects to the failure to negotiate with the neighborhood in any manner that was conclusive. I have negotiated with developers for over 20 years on behalf of my neighborhood, including negotiating on 4 different pad developments. I've never seen anything like this. I strongly urge you, Mr. Iarino, to not approve this.
Good.
Because, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Someone else is not on mute. Would you please show us the courtesy of muting your phone or device? Please continue, Ms. Lett.
I'm extremely concerned about this pad if it were to be approved, because it sets an incredibly bad precedent, not only because of the failure to negotiate in any meaningful way with the neighborhood association, which is not the way these projects have been handled in the past, but also because, as Rincon Heights representatives have pointed out, that the details of the project are so nebulous that it simply does not meet the requirement of a pad rezoning, which typically spells out in considerable detail what the project will be. So this is just unacceptable in terms of the precedent that has been set over the course of literally decades of developers negotiating with neighborhoods in good faith. It simply must not stand. I cannot stress enough that this would be a fiasco if this were to be approved as is. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much. The next person I would like to hear from is Mark Homan. Mr. Homan.
Mr. Holman wasn't able to join us this evening.
Okay. Thank you very much. Timothy Kinney. Mr. Kinney.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Great. Good evening, Mr. Zoning Examiner. My name is Tim Kinney. Last name is Kinney. I'm an attorney representing the Rincon Heights Neighborhood Association. Address is 4957 East Fort Lowell Road, Tucson 85712. So you've heard from many neighborhood members tonight and received many letters from community members around the university area. They've expressed their reasonable concerns about this proposal that have not been addressed or satisfied yet. I won't reiterate the concerns, but I do briefly want to attempt to bring things together. You heard from us at the March 11th hearing about how the applicant hasn't done enough outreach with us to know whether some sort of an agreement could be reached or to know whether the neighborhood's concerns could be satisfied. You're also aware that from the beginning, the neighborhood has had three primary concerns: heights, group dwelling use, and an affordable housing component. As you know, since the last hearing, we met with the applicant and his team twice, and the applicant and the president of the Rincon Heights neighborhood met privately a third time. The meetings were very friendly and amicable. At the meetings, the neighborhood offered some major concessions, as you've heard, in an attempt to make this project something they could support, including allowing group dwelling in certain areas and allowing heights greater than what they would like. The applicant declined these offers. There were also a few minor concessions offered by the applicant, the biggest of which was the removal of group dwelling as a permitted use, but the neighborhood had to agree to drop all of their other concerns, which they were not willing to do. Our meetings with the applicant ended with them sticking to their proposal as is, with the only real change being made was removing dry cleaning as a permitted use. This change hasn't been solidified by them in writing yet, however. But despite no important changes being made, the neighborhood's concerns are completely reasonable and valid. They aren't made up concerns or designed to thwart progress or derail anything happening on this property. They're legitimate concerns raised by people who will have to live next to this forever once it's built, and will have to deal with all of its associated impacts, known and unknown. The application before you is entirely speculative, unlike many other rezoning proposals around the university in the recent past. They don't know specifically what types of uses will eventually occupy the buildings, and they don't know what types of tenants will occupy the buildings, certainly. Typically, as with other PADs around the university, the proposed uses are narrowed down to a handful, if not one or two clearly identified uses. But here, they're essentially asking for a blank check to develop the property with any possibility of, I think, 26 different permitted uses. They're requesting to go from a mostly R2 zone property to some of the most intense zoning in the city. Because of this, the neighborhood has zero assurances of what might take place on the property in the future. And if approved now without addressing the neighborhood's concerns, they'll have lost most, if not all, of their opportunity to be heard in the future about what takes place on this property. A purely speculative rezoning like this should require a much higher burden of proving why such a blank check should be given, since they're asking for so much more than they have now, and it's so unclear what might be built someday. Regardless, and at a minimum, it's the applicant's burden to prove why their application is appropriate and why it should be approved despite neighborhood concerns. But they haven't met this burden here, and they haven't shown why their application should be approved despite not making any changes to address the reasonable concerns of the neighbors. I know we had hoped to come to an agreement in order for the neighborhood to support this application, and in turn the neighborhood could have been a champion for the project as it went through the approval process, but that hasn't happened. The neighborhood therefore has no reason to support the application in its current form, and only reasons to oppose it. And as Lee said, they respectfully ask that you recommend denial at this time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kinney. Would anyone else in the audience like to be heard?
Yes.
Please go ahead, state your name and address first for us, please.
My name is. I'm sorry, was that? I'll wait.
Yes, please. I see your hand up. We'll call on you very next time. Go ahead, sir.
My name is Mel Cohen, C-O-H-E-N. My address is 522 North Norris Avenue. I'm a catty corner to this intersection in Sam Hughes. And there are two really important issues. One, anecdotally, the number of traffic accidents, pedestrian deaths from where the crosswalk is to 1 block east of this area is incredible. I mean, and that's not going to be addressed except by making it more dangerous. And noise that is an assault
on living here, especially when the noise is coming from a structure that's much higher. So what I visualize is similar to what is the mass going on at 4th Avenue and 6th in size. So it's roughly take the stadium and put the same size across the street, and noise that emanates from it. And the difference between uses is really visibly shown from where I'm sitting looking west. To the south is Sam Hughes Place and how those housing units were designed. They're not taller, they're 1 story above. They are consistent with the neighborhood, and there's no problems. The other, which is directly west of our house, has been a constant source of noise assault and drunken parties, traffic backup on the university police. I'm sure have a record of how many times I've called. And it's when you put that size of a facility that tall, it's going to create a problem. And so I would ask you to reject changing the zoning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen.
I would also, if I could say, I somehow I didn't get notice of this, and I would think I'm within spitting distance from when they're standing up to down on me. Thank you.
Well, then you have considerable talent, and I appreciate that. Someone has their hand up. Would you please go right ahead? Start with your name and address.
My name is William Craig. My last name is spelled C-R-A-I-G. I'm at 2043 East 3rd Street here in Tucson.
Thank you.
So I'm looking at what's going on here in the last several meetings, including the ones we've had with Mr. Cummings. And I see that we're really not getting any closer. A couple of minor issues have been dealt with, but for the most part, the big issues have just been poo-pooed, and they've told us, he has told us that he's not interested in going in this direction at all. From where we're standing, I'd like to see us go back to an R2 across the board and then start there to work our way up instead of going from pie in the sky and trying to work our way back down, because the people in this community deserve more than being treated as if the R2, the zoning that's in place right now has no meaning whatsoever. I understand PAD is to deal through this, but we should use that as a baseline, not as something that doesn't exist at all. I would love to see a real movement towards getting the size of this thing down 140 feet. I understand the first story is 20 feet tall. That doesn't change the 140-foot mass of this thing when you see it from that perspective. 18,000 square feet is 6,000 square feet bigger than one of the largest places down on 4th Avenue, one of the big party places down there. This is a half again that size. Why would we want to put this right next to a residential area? I realize it's across the street from the University of Arizona, and that you have a lot of people that would love to have something that close that they can just walk over, have a grand time, and then amble home afterwards. But is that really acceptable for 2 historic neighborhoods to have this right on their doorsteps? Thank you very much. I wish that we could get closer on this, but at this point in time, very little effort's been made on the part of Mr. Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Would anyone else in the audience like to be heard?
Yes, I would love to be heard. I also have my hand up, but maybe it's not visible.
Oh, I've got it right now. I see it. Ms. Sonmez.
Yes, hi.
Hi. Please go ahead. Yes.
Should I spell it? E-V-R-E-N is the first name. S-O-N-M-E-Z is the last name.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. You've already heard some issues around transportation, and I just want to maybe take a minute to highlight a few different angles just to bring us back to the asks that we had in the original letter that we sent out and some of the transportation related items that we had requested to be included in the in a revision of the PAD at the time. So, you know, I think the way I see it is not really, or the way we see it as at least the subcommittee that's been involved in this work is not so much that there's an issue with any kind of development that will generate, you know, negative transportation impacts, but much like everything else, it's all in the details. So, you know, you can have a high density development that actually enhances multimodal mobility and discourages single occupancy vehicle trips, which is exactly what we wanted to see on the site, especially given the context, because this is, you know, literally across the street from the university. We anticipate many people, you know, students or perhaps folks who are working there would be living in this development and would be accessing the campus, not by driving. And we're also blocks away from the streetcar. We're blocks away from the 3rd Street Bicycle Boulevard. We're blocks away from 9th Street, which will become a bicycle boulevard really soon. So we believe that as far as the site specifics go in the, you know, in the broader city of Tucson, maybe in addition to some location like downtown, 4th Avenue, some of the other university area neighborhoods, this is the perfect place to make the development more transit oriented and more multimodal mobility friendly. And we believe that we haven't hit that mark. Just, you know, we don't think this development represents that. And, you know, we articulated several issues in the letter, and I'll just maybe highlight a couple here, not to make this extremely long. Parking is a big one. So we had 2 very specific asks. One was to reduce the current parking provisions included in this development. And, you know, like think about Broadway, the overlay, this is included as an incentive. People, you know, who incorporate mobility hubs or affordable housing are actually getting a reduction. And here we have the opportunity to reduce it from scratch, because we know that, you know, evidence shows from cities across the US and around the world that if we provide parking, especially free parking, we're just going to invite more people to park and drive. So it's just a very simple mathematical correlation, right? So why not reduce the number of cars that we're inviting to the site in the first place by providing all this free parking? So we wanted that to be reduced to more around like 0.7 parking spaces per unit for residential. And then the other strategy that's really key to what's called transportation demand management in wonky terms is unbundling the cost of parking from the cost of housing. So we said, you know, let's include this kind of a strategy. So parking spaces are being leased or sold. I'm assuming this is rental housing, but if it's, you know, condominiums, it could be sold separately from the cost of the housing units. And that was also not met with sympathy. I guess that's that they said they can't, you know, commit to doing that. So, and we have some other issues, you know, around incorporating bike share and enhancing the pedestrian crossing. I won't go to all of that because I think it will take more time. But I mean, I just want to, I think, also bring us back to the larger goals in the city, right? We're in the midst of creating a climate action plan, and we know that transportation is the second largest source of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. And then at the same time, there's this report that just came out, or news story, that Tucson, along with Phoenix, I believe, saw some of the worst affordability reduction in the housing, in the cost, when it comes to cost of housing. And we know that parking substantially increases the cost of housing, because we know that when we don't charge for parking separately, we just call it free parking, but free parking is never free. It's always passed on to the tenants. It's always passed on to the homeowners. It's never really free. So, and then, you know, we have a complete streets policy that has actually formalized the city's intent to walking, biking, and transit. So all the things that the team shared in the beginning, like Miguel's, you know, points that he highlighted, I agree. I fully agree. I think those are, yeah, I mean, this is what we want to see also. And we do support walkable destinations in the neighborhood. We do support seeing higher densities. I just don't think that that vision that is articulated in that presentation is actually reflected in the specifics of this PAD proposal. So I would also respectfully ask that you recommend that this doesn't go forward in its current iteration. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else in the audience like to speak? Hearing no one, Mr. Cummings, would you like to speak again?
I'm sorry, I was muted.
That's quite all right.
What I was saying is, I think we're losing sight of what the whole infill project or philosophy is supposed to be doing here. We've got a major university located in the middle of an urban area that's landlocked. You've got established neighborhoods on all sides. At some point, barring encroaching into the neighborhoods, the idea of going up vertical makes a lot of sense. And if you can provide more housing stock, even if it's rental, market rate apartments, it answers a lot of the problems that they've been discussing about not having enough housing around the university or in the Midtown area. This is a project that doesn't just satisfy the housing requirement for U of A students. It could be for staff. It could be for people my age, 63, that are moving down from the foothills that would like a place to live near a vibrant university that they can walk to. And the whole notion of creating all this horrible traffic, let's think about it. If you're living next to the university, instead of living in the foothills and driving down to the university, doesn't that reduce congestion, reduce pollution, and the fact that people want to live down here? Right now, there is a shortage. It's very expensive, and I think what's going to happen when this project gets done, some things I couldn't say, and I'm going to say a few right now, is I'm working with a specialty grocer on the corner that probably everyone in this audience has gone to and would love to see there. And I think when this project is said and done, I mean, I've been at the corner of 6th and Tucson Boulevard for 38 years, and I had seen what a successful market in a neighborhood restaurant bar have done to values. And just look at the listings, real estate listings of people looking for homes to buy. Oh, walking distance to what was the Rincon market, and hopefully now Flores market and the Bob Dobbs, and there's a cleaner on the corner. There's a lot, and I don't want to be combative or try to say it's disingenuous. I sat down and negotiated in good faith those last 3 meetings that I had. And, it just comes to the point where you need an outside source, you need an objective person such as yourself to make some decisions. We could sit here for another month and we're not going to agree. I get the feeling that, that I'm beating them down with a hammer. They're asking for things that I just can't do. And it's, a matter of another month isn't going to change that. So I want you to know my sincerity that this project is something that it's not going to be a thorn in the neighborhood side. If anything, it's going to increase the quality of life, eventually land values. And, I respectfully disagree with a lot of things that have been said. I've been portrayed, especially when they went to the media, and just gave erroneous news to them about how horrible. I've never talked about an 18,000 square foot bar. I've never talked about this being a student housing project. So I think it's time that we make a decision, we move on, and it's as you pointed out very poignantly the last meeting. It all comes down to the mayor and city council, and this isn't over. What it needs is an objective opinion, and I hope you look at some of not that I discount anyone who lives 3 miles away from here to give their opinion, but a lot of these disapproval letters have not been from people that live in the surrounding area. They're from miles around, which is fine. But I really think, John, it's time that, you know, you look at all the facts, you look at that, the planning department who, you know, has scrutinized this PAD, has asked for us to make changes, which we did. They come out now and say it's appropriate. I think we move on.
All right. So thank you all for your participation. I am closing the public hearing, and as indicated in my opening remarks, my preliminary report will be done within 5 business days, which will be next Thursday. And I want to reach out to each and every one of you and say thank you for participating. It's a very important process. And Mr. Marsh, my son broke his arm. The good doctors at TMC were able to set it, so no surgery, but I appreciate the good words. And so everyone have a lovely evening, and I'm closing the hearing, and be well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Reno.